at my husband's funeral, while his casket was still open and my hands were shaking so badly I could hardly hold on to anything. My own son looked right at me and said, "You're a widow now, just a burden." He didn't even lower his voice. That same night, he took my checkbook and emptied it. Before we begin, make sure to like and subscribe, and please tell me and others what's one life lesson everyone should hear before it's too late. Share it in the comments below. Thanks. 3 weeks later, I started a little business out of my garage. All I had was an old folding table, 2 grandkids who liked to help, and a big lump of anger in my chest. Now, that same son works for me. Just today, he asked if I'd think about making him my business partner. Should I say yes, or should I remind him who paid the bills when he walked away? You can decide how that story ends. It might surprise you. My name is Helen Parker. I'm 68, recently widowed, and apparently, according to my son, nothing but extra weight to carry around. The funeral felt like a fog. People brought over casseroles and gave me hugs that were too tight. Everyone acted like I was being so strong. But really, I was just too numb to cry in front of a crowd. I remember staring at James's casket, thinking how strange it felt that he could still be so alive in my mind even while he was lying there, stiff and silent. He always hated wearing suits. He said they made him itch, yet there he was, dressed like a fancy banker instead of the mechanic he really was. I couldn't even roll my eyes at him one last time. After the service, folks whispered about how well I was holding up. I just nodded, said thank you to everyone, and tried not to fall apart before I got home. I thought Derek, my son, would finally show up for me not as the distant boy who moved away, but as a man who just lost his dad. But when we got back to my house, he pulled me into the kitchen. He still had his sunglasses on, like he couldn't be bothered to look me in the eye. He said, "You can't keep living like this, Ma. What are you going to do? Live off Social Security and casseroles? You're just a burden." He didn't even build up to it. He just spit it out like he was reading the weather. I stared at him, waiting for him to take it back, but he didn't. In fact, he looked almost happy to finally say it out loud. I didn't argue. I just watched him grab another sandwich, kiss his kids, and leave with his wife following close behind, like she couldn't wait to get out of my kitchen. That night, I sat in James's old chair, the one with the squeaky armrest and the burn mark from when he tried to fix the toaster with a cigarette hanging from his mouth. I turned on Jeopardy, but kept it on mute and just stared into the quiet. My hands couldn't stop moving. I folded napkins we'd never use and sorted silverware that didn't matter. That's what grief feels like. Your heart is screaming, but your hands are just trying to keep busy so you don't fall apart. I thought about calling my sister, but she would have just said what everyone else says, give it time. But time doesn't pay the bills. Time doesn't stop your own child from calling you useless. And time sure doesn't bring back the man who used to sneak you a Snickers bar when you were sad. The next morning, I found myself putting on bright red lipstick for no reason. It was the color James liked. I looked ridiculous, sitting there in my bathrobe with ruby lips, but for a second, I felt like I hadn't completely disappeared. I walked out to the garage, not really knowing why, and saw James's old workbench still covered in tools and coffee cups. It smelled like Himoto oil and black coffee. There was a little note stuck under a wrench. It said, "Don't forget, the chili cook-off next month. Bring Helen's cornbread." It was in his handwriting. I just stood there for a long time, holding that note. A few days later, I got a letter from the bank. Turns out, James had missed some payments, and the house wasn't really paid off like I thought. I didn't have a job, and everyone just knew me as the sweet lady from church who baked pies. For a minute, I wondered if Derek was right. Maybe I was just a burden now. But that afternoon, Mia, my 8-year-old granddaughter, came over. She asked if she could help me bake cookies to make the house smell like Grandpa again. I cried right into the mixing bowl and told her it was just onions. That night, something changed. I pulled out an old notebook and started writing ideas. Not big business plans, just little thoughts. What if I sold baked goods? What if I hosted dinners for the neighborhood? What if I turned all this hurt into something that mattered? I didn't know what I was doing. I just knew I couldn't sit in that quiet house waiting to feel like myself again. Maybe, just maybe, there was still a version of me who wasn't only someone's mother or someone's widow. I didn't realize it then, but that was the night everything started to change. The day after Derek's cruel words, the house felt colder. like something vital had disappeared along with James. I woke up too early again and just sat in bed, pretending I was still tired, because saying I was lost felt too real. When I woke up that morning, I was wide awake, but I didn't want to admit it, because being awake meant facing another long, quiet day by myself. The house felt too still, no smell of fresh coffee, no sports radio coming from the kitchen, no James muttering under his breath while he tried to fix something he probably shouldn't have been touching. I shuffled into the kitchen and reached for his coffee mug without even thinking, the one with the chipped handle and the faded "Oh my grandpa" logo from Father's Day years ago. I poured myself a cup, took one sip, and set it right back down. It tasted like cardboard, or maybe it was just me. I sat there, staring out the window, watching the neighbor's dog chase squirrels like nothing had changed. That's the worst part of grief, how the world keeps moving along like normal, while your own life feels like it's fallen apart. I started writing out a grocery list even though I knew I wouldn't go to the store. Then I remembered that letter about the mortgage I'd stuffed in a drawer under the phone. I'd told myself I'd deal with it later, but now there was no one else to handle it. So I pulled it out and read it, even though I really didn't want to. Turns out James had refinanced the house 6 months before he died. There was still a big balance left, and I only had about 2 months before things got serious. I didn't understand all the numbers, but the big bold words "final notice" were pretty clear. I called the bank, hoping maybe there'd been some mistake, or at least that I'd get to talk to a real person who'd be kind. But the woman on the phone sounded tired and bored, like she was reading from a piece of paper. "Mrs. Parker, the payments haven't been made since March," she said. I told her James had passed away. She said she was sorry for my loss and asked if I wanted to set up a payment plan. I hung up before I started crying again. After that, I wandered through the house like I was visiting a museum. I touched the picture frames, lifted up James's old coats that still smelled faintly of his cologne, opened drawers just to hear them squeak. In the hall closet, I found a dusty cardboard box labeled shop tax stuff. Inside were greasy receipts, a few wrenches, and tucked between an old ledger and a photo of James with some man I didn't recognize. A handwritten envelope. It just said Helen. No stamp, no address. My hands were shaking a little when I opened it. Inside was a short note in big, messy letters. "James asked me to hold on to this in case anything happened to him. Call me if you're reading this." It was from Frank Delaney, James's old foreman from the auto shop. Folded up with the note was a check for $10,000, dated just 2 weeks before James died. My first thought was, why didn't he tell me about this? My second was, why was this check never cashed? I called Frank. His voice was slower than I remembered, but still gentle. "I told James I'd drop that off myself," he said, "but he told me he'd take care of it. Must have slipped his mind." I asked if the check was still good. Frank let out a long sigh. "I canceled it when he didn't cash it." I thought maybe he'd changed his mind. I didn't get mad at Frank. I didn't even get mad at James. I just sat on the edge of the bed holding that piece of paper, feeling like it was one more thing I didn't understand. Maybe James was scared, or ashamed, or just in denial. He'd always handled the money. I'd trusted him, maybe too much. That night, I finally opened James's old laptop. It took me 10 tries to guess the password. Corvette, 1979. Of course he never could stop talking about that car. When I got in, I started clicking around, looking for something, anything to explain what had been going on in his head. Instead, I found dozens of bookmarked YouTube videos about starting a small food business in retirement, tutorials about community kitchens, hosting events, even beginner accounting tips. I sat there staring at the screen, completely stunned. I hadn't known he was even thinking about something like that. Then I found a draft email he'd started to write to me but never sent. It said, "If anything happens before I get this going, maybe you'll take it and run with it. You're the people person. I'm just the wrench guy." I laughed, then choked, then cried so hard I thought my chest might crack open. That night, I fell asleep in his recliner, the laptop still open on my lap, with some video playing about how to register a sole proprietorship. I didn't know what I was doing, but something had shifted. I wasn't just losing pieces of my life anymore. I was starting to find them too. Maybe, just maybe, I wasn't as alone as I'd thought. Days after finding that email, I was back in the kitchen, still wearing the same old sweatshirt from yesterday. I stared at the stack of bills like they might disappear if I glared hard enough. But the idea James had this little food business kept circling in my mind like a fly I couldn't swat away. Me, start a business. I hadn't worked since 1993, unless you count PTA bake sales and running the church potluck like a general. But the thought stuck with me. He believed in it enough to look it up. He believed in me enough to leave that half-finished note. And somewhere between feeling desperate and not wanting Derek to be right about me, I realized maybe it was worth a try. I opened a new browser tab and typed in how to start a food business after 60. You'd be amazed at how many stories popped up. Moms who became bakers, grandmas turning their kitchens into catering companies, widows like me who just didn't want to fade into the background. One story stuck with me. It was about a woman named Rhonda Jackson in Detroit. She started cooking meals for her neighbors and turned it into a full-on catering business with 6 employees. Her husband had died, too. She said grief was the spark, but purpose was the fire. That line kept bouncing around in my head all day. By the afternoon, I'd made a little list of what I still had left. James's old workshop, space dusty but sturdy, a kitchen that still worked, mostly, and 2 grandkids who loved to stir things and scatter flour everywhere. I didn't have money, not really, but I had time, stubbornness, and apparently a whole lot of grief that was ready to turn into something else. So I did it. I drove down to the local SBA office, that plain concrete building near the post office that I'd always assumed was just for people who liked paperwork. The receptionist, the tired-looking woman named Dina with a bright green scarf, didn't even blink when I said I wanted to start a food business. "You and half the neighborhood," she muttered, then handed me a thick packet and pointed me toward a seminar in the back room. There I was, sitting with 4 other confused-looking people, listening to a man in a checkered blazer named Steve who talked in nothing but bullet points. I didn't understand half of what he said: profit margins, overhead LLC versus sole proprietorship, but I scribbled down every word like my life depended on it, because in a way, it did. When I got home, I called Mia and Luke over and asked if they wanted to help me come up with a name. Mia suggested Grandma's Food. Luke upped the ante with Super Grandma's Hot Stuff, which I gently said no to. After some giggles and a lot of brainstorming, we settled on Parker's Pantry and Events. Simple, personal, and something I could grow. I went online and registered the name for $35 using James's old PayPal account. I even printed out a little certificate that said Business Owner, Helen Parker. It felt a bit silly, like I was playing pretend, but it also made my heart race in a good way. Next, I had to figure out where I was going to cook. I thought about using my kitchen, but the oven was moody, and the last thing I needed was the health inspector giving me a heart attack. That's when I remembered the old storage unit behind James's workshop. It was dusty and smelled like motor oil, but I could almost see it: tables lined up, a little prep area, maybe a fridge in the corner. I stood there, broom in hand, telling myself that if I could survive raising Derek, I could survive this too. Over the next few days, I made flyers with Mia's help. They said, small bites and big smiles, community dinners, birthdays, backyard events. We printed 20 copies at the library and walked around the neighborhood taping them to mailboxes and community boards. Mia carried the tape dispenser like it was her crown. Soon, a few calls started coming in. Nothing big, just curious neighbors wanting help with a baby shower or a church potluck. I said yes to every single one. I didn't even have a working oven yet, but I felt like someone had hooked jumper cables up to my heart. Then, one evening while I was scrubbing the old linoleum floor in the workshop, I heard the screen door creak open behind me. Derek stood there, arms crossed, looking around like he'd walked into a crime scene. "What the hell is this?" he asked. I stood up, wiped my hands on a dish towel, and looked him right in the eye. "This," I said, "is what a burden does with her free time." He didn't laugh. He just shook his head and muttered something about wasting money before he walked right back out the door without waiting for an answer. I stood there for a minute, heart thumping, hands trembling, but not from fear, from pure, hot anger. And for the first time in weeks, I didn't feel sad anymore. I felt furious. And oddly enough, that felt like progress. That night, I filed my official business registration. I even emailed Steve from the SBA class to ask about licenses. I still had no clue how this was all going to work, but I knew one thing for sure: I was done letting people treat me like I was dead weight. I was going to make something out of this mess. And if Derek didn't like it, he could keep on walking. The next morning, I woke up sore all over, arms aching from scrubbing, legs tired from climbing up and down the step stool to dust the shelves in what was slowly turning into my prep kitchen. I made myself coffee that finally didn't taste like cardboard and sat down with a yellow legal pad to plan my first official event, a backyard birthday party for my neighbor's 7-year-old twins. They were paying me in cash and leftover balloons. Mia and Luke were already at the table, munching cereal like tiny consultants. Mia suggested heart-shaped cookies with edible glitter. Luke wanted hot dogs shaped like octopuses. I nodded seriously and wrote both ideas down, because for the first time in a long while, I wasn't just surviving, I was building something. I went out back to take some measurements when I noticed the garage door was cracked open. That was strange because I always kept it locked, especially now that I'd started storing supplies in their folding chairs, paper plates, and the new hand mixer I'd bought with the deposit from the twins' birthday party. I stepped inside and froze. The boxers had been opened. My receipts were scattered everywhere, and the folder with all my event contracts was missing. At first, I thought maybe someone had broken in, but there was no sign of forced entry, and nothing was gone except paperwork and that $50 mixer. My stomach twisted with dread. I hurried back inside to check the kitchen drawer where I kept my checkbook. It was gone, too. I didn't want to jump to conclusions, but I didn't have to wonder long. That evening, Derek called. His voice was already defensive. I took the checks, he said, like he was just stating the weather. You needed a wake-up call, Ma. You're throwing money at some fantasy. It's embarrassing. I just stood there, holding the cordless phone, staring at the pot of spaghetti I'd been boiling, feeling too numb to even be shocked. You stole from me, I finally said. No, he snapped. I protected you. You're welcome. Then he hung up. I stared at the phone for a long time before setting it back in the cradle, like it might explode. That night, I didn't sleep at all. I lay in bed, staring at the ceiling, thinking about all the things I could do: drive to Derek's house and throw a bag of flour at his door, or maybe just give up and let the whole dream die quietly. But right in the middle of all that swirling anger and sadness, there was a small knock at my bedroom door. It was Mia, wearing her pajamas and holding a wrinkled piece of paper covered in glitter and hearts. At the top, she'd written, "Pantry, I made signs for your party," she whispered, "so people know it's real." And just like that, my mind was made up. I wasn't quitting. The next day, I called the landlord of the space attached to James's workshop. I explained what I was doing, bracing myself for him to either raise the rent or tell me to get lost. But instead, he surprised me. He said he'd seen my flyers around the neighborhood and asked if I could cater his niece's baby shower in 2 weeks. I agreed on the spot, already trying to figure out how many meatballs I could make with just a stove. That afternoon, I took my last $100 and bought a folding table, some chafing dishes, and a fresh receipt book. When I got home, I found a letter taped to my front door. It was a warning notice from the landlord, saying I was breaking the lease by running a business without the right zoning. My heart started to race, but something about the timing felt too perfect. Derek had been in that space. Derek knew exactly what I was planning. And now, suddenly, there was a zoning complaint. I called the landlord back and calmly asked who had filed it. He hesitated before admitting it was submitted anonymously but came from someone in his family. I didn't argue, I just thanked him and hung up. This time, I didn't cry, I didn't even get mad. I just made myself some tea and sat on the porch while Mia drew smiley faces on a stack of paper cups for the birthday party. If Derek wanted a war, fine. But I wasn't going to fight with yelling or tears. I was going to fight by proving him wrong, with every cookie, every RSVP, every person who smiled and said, "This is exactly what we needed." Because sure, I was a widow, but I wasn't finished, not by a long shot. When the day of the backyard birthday party came, I had 6 folding chairs, 4 mismatched plastic tables, and 1 rented cotton candy machine that sounded like it might catch fire if I pushed my luck. But somehow, it all came together. Mia and Luke wore matching aprons and helped me carry in trays of finger sandwiches and a big batch of star-shaped cookies because I couldn't find a heart-shaped cutter that hadn't rusted. The twins' mom hugged me so hard I almost dropped the lemonade jug. Within 20 minutes, kids were everywhere sticky, screaming, running around in that chaotic way that somehow feels like pure joy when you're standing far enough back. I ran the event like a general, handing out napkins, refilling drinks, and gently untangling balloon disasters. At one point, I spotted Derek's wife, Amanda, standing off to the side, watching everything with a look I couldn't quite read, something between doubt and respect. I smiled and waved. She lifted her hand and waved back, just a little. After everyone left and I was sweeping up confetti from places confetti really shouldn't be, the twins' mom pressed a folded check into my hand and whispered, "This was the first time they've smiled since the divorce. Thank you." I didn't even look at the amount until I got home. $200. I held it for a long moment, just staring, like it might vanish. It wasn't much, but it was money, and it was mine. I earned that money by doing something I built from the ground up. For the first time in a long while, I didn't just feel useful, I felt proud. The next day, I made a little post in our neighborhood Facebook group. I thanked everyone for their support and casually mentioned that Parker's Pantry was open for small events, especially for families on a budget. I added a few pictures Mia had snapped on my phone, blurry but sweet, and hit post. By that evening, the post had been shared 17 times. I had 6 messages in my inbox asking about prices, menus, and if I did baby showers, church picnics, or themed brunches. I didn't have answers to half of their questions, but I wrote back yes to every single one. Then I stayed up late researching how to actually pull it all off. Over the next 2 weeks, I catered a book club meeting, an anniversary dinner in someone's garage, and a neighborhood potluck where I made enough macaroni and cheese to feed half the town. Word started spreading, and not just on Facebook. A local food blogger named Dana, who wrote for Eat Local, Eat Loud, showed up at the potluck. She took some photos and wrote an article called From Widow to Whisk, the story of Parker's Pantry. It took off in our little town way, and the next day I had 3 more bookings. One woman called to ask if I wanted to set up a booth at the farmer's market. I said yes, before I even figured out where I'd get the equipment. Derek found out about it the following weekend. I was in the workshop, testing a batch of lemon bars, when I heard the screen door slam. He walked in without knocking, looking around like he couldn't believe what he was seeing. "So this is it?" he asked, gesturing at everything like it offended him. "You're really doing this?" I kept mixing. "Yep, you're feeding strangers in a garage and calling it a business." He said it like it was the punchline of a bad joke. I paused, looked him straight in the eye, and said, "Strangers who pay, strangers who smile when they leave." He opened his mouth, then closed it. For a moment, he looked tired, like something else was wearing him down. But I didn't ask. I didn't feel like I owed him any softness right then. He just shook his head and walked out without another word. That week, the farmer's market was a blur. Tables of fresh jam and vegetables, old couples arguing over zucchini, kids begging their parents for snow cones. My booth was tucked between a honey stand and a woman selling birdhouses shaped like famous landmarks. I set out trays of mini cake, brownie bites, and something I called grief granola bars as a little inside joke. Those ended up selling the fastest. By noon, everything was gone. Dana from the blog came by again and asked if she could film a feature video about me. Nearly dropped a tray of lemon tarts. She filmed me the next day in the kitchen while I talked about James, Mia, and Luke, and what it felt like to find purpose again when you'd been sure you were too old to be anything but invisible. It was honest and a little raw. When the video went live, the comments poured in. Dozens of women said they felt seen, inspired, like maybe they could start something. I cried over a mixing bowl again. Then I washed my hands, took a deep breath, and started planning the baby shower for that weekend. Because this wasn't just a hobby anymore. It was real, and I was just getting started. The morning I got the call about the corporate event started, like any other, I was elbow deep in a batch of cinnamon rolls, the kitchen warm and smelling like butter and sugar. For a minute, it felt like everything might really be okay. The phone rang. I wiped my hands on my apron and picked up, expecting another birthday inquiry or maybe Dina from the SBA Center with one of her polite but snippy zoning reminders. But instead, it was a woman named Clarissa from a local tech company I'd never heard of. They needed catering for a small corporate event the next Friday, about 50 people. Nothing fancy, just something homey and comforting, which honestly felt like my entire brand if you sliced it open. I said yes so quickly I think I startled her. I scribbled everything down on the back of a grocery receipt, already running through my meatball recipe in my head. Later that afternoon, I was reorganizing the dry goods shelves when Derek showed up again. No warning, no Amanda this time, just him, leaning in the doorway like he hadn't just called my whole dream a joke 2 weeks ago. I heard about the gala, he said. He wasn't smiling, but he wasn't sneering either. He just looked ... curious. I nodded, pretending to be busy, with a bag of lentils I didn't really need to touch. Yeah, kind of a big deal for me. He shifted, looking awkward. Then he said, "You're going to need help." That stopped me. I turned to look at him, raising one eyebrow the way James used to whenever someone was full of it. "You offering?" He shrugged, standing there in that same teenage slouch he always used when he was trying to act like he didn't care. "Just saying. I've planned stuff like this before, at my job." And that was a surprise. I didn't even know Derek's job had anything to do with event planning. I looked him over for a long moment, wondering if I could trust him. Finally, I handed him a clipboard with the guest list and the food plan. "If you screw this up," I said, "I'll make you wear a hairnet and scrub grease traps for a week." He didn't laugh, but he didn't walk out either. And honestly, that was something. The next few days flew by in a blur. We planned the menu, made big shopping runs, and tested out new finger food ideas. Mia and Luke helped, giving their expert opinions that mostly involve licking things and saying they were either too crunchy or not purple enough. Derek started showing up every day. He always came in with that stiff, careful posture like he was daring me to question why he was there. But he worked. He reorganized the supply closet, fixed the prep schedule, and even made a color-coded spreadsheet with timers. I teased him about it constantly, but inside, I was impressed. For the first time in years, we weren't fighting. We weren't hugging either, but at least we were moving in the same direction. It felt like a small miracle. Then, just 2 nights before the big event, I got the email. The client canceled. They'd picked another caterer who swooped in last minute with a cheaper deal. I stared at that message for a long time before showing it to Derek. He read it, his face going still in that too careful way that made my stomach twist. "Do you know anything about this?" I asked. He hesitated just long enough to give himself away before he said, "It's probably just bad luck." His voice was flat, and something in me went cold. I didn't push. What was the point? Whether he had messed it up himself or let someone else do it, the job was gone. I was right back where I started. That night, I sat at the kitchen table, staring at my planner. All the slots I'd filled in were suddenly empty, like someone had erased them with a swipe of a hand. Mia wandered in, holding a drawing of a meatball superhero. "Are we still doing the big fancy dinner?" she asked. I didn't have the heart to tell her no, so I just smiled and said, "Not that one, but maybe another." When she went to bed, I stayed up late, rewriting everything. I adjusted my prices, brainstormed smaller packages, and made lists of local libraries and nonprofits that might want affordable catering. I refused to let this break me. I'd been knocked down too many times to let one cancelled event end it all. And deep down, I knew I'd been right not to trust Derek completely. Maybe he was trying to help, but some part of him still couldn't stand the idea that I might succeed without him. The next morning, the community center called. Someone had read the blog story about Parker's Pantry and wanted to know if I could cater a lunch for seniors the next weekend. I said yes before I even asked about the budget. I needed to keep moving. I needed to prove to myself and to Derek that I wasn't just surviving anymore. I was building something. And nothing, not even sabotage wrapped up in family guilt, was going to stop me. The day after that canceled job, I walked into my workshop-turned-kitchen with a mop in one hand and my binder in the other. I was done feeling sorry for myself. Grief had already stolen enough time from me. Disappointment wasn't going to get any more. I spent the morning deep cleaning every surface, scrubbing the floors like they were personally to blame. Then, I reorganized the pantry, while muttering recipes under my breath like they were battle cries. I called the community center to confirm the luncheon, and got straight to planning a menu that felt welcoming but not boring: chicken salad sliders, little cups of tomato basil soup, and sugar cookies shaped like teapots. Seniors deserved something fun too. I didn't have any help lined up yet, and the thought of cooking for 60 people alone made my chest tight. But I told myself I'd figure it out. Maybe I'd bribe Mia and Luke with extra iPad time, or borrow some teens from the neighborhood. I was knee-deep in cookie dough when Amanda showed up without warning, holding a half-empty Tupperware container, and looking more nervous than I'd ever seen her. "These were good," she said, setting the container down like it might explode, from the birthday party. Mia brought them over. Thanks, I said, blinking at her. She shifted, then blurted, "You're really doing this, like it's real." I shrugged, trying not to choke up. She hesitated, then said, like she'd practiced it in the car, "Derek's been weird lately. Quiet, kind of, ashamed, I think." I didn't answer. I wasn't ready to open that box yet. Before she left, she looked back and added softly, "He's watching. Just so you know." That night, I barely slept. My mind ran in circles over grocery lists, volunteer plans, and whether I could get away with borrowing chairs from the church again. By morning, I had a plan. I called Dina at the SBA office to ask if there were any youth volunteer programs nearby. 2 hours later, she connected me with a high school culinary club that needed community service hours. That afternoon, I met them in the parking lot, 10 teenagers in oversized chef jackets with more energy than sense. I almost cried from relief. They were loud and a little chaotic, but they showed up ready to peel vegetables and frost cookies. When I promised them pizza after the luncheon, they nearly cheered. The next few days were a blur, me teaching knife skills while dodging flying carrot tops. Teenagers bickering over who got to use the mixer, Mia and Luke decorating cookie boxes with stickers shaped like smiley faces. On the morning of the luncheon, the sky threatened rain but held off just long enough to load everything into 3 borrowed minivans. The community center kitchen was ancient and smelled faintly of boiled cabbage, but we made it work. I set up tables with dollar store centerpieces and little printed menus Mia had designed. By noon, the place was full of seniors laughing, clapping, and saying the soup tasted like something out of a fancy restaurant. I stood back, taking it all in, thinking, this is what James meant. This is what he saw before I did. I was wiping down a counter when I noticed Derek standing near the back wall, arms crossed, watching. He hadn't told me he was coming. He just stood there, as one of the high school kids ladled soup with the focus of a surgeon, and Mia explained the cookie decorations to a white-haired woman in a shawl. I walked over, not sure what to say. Before I could speak, he asked, before I could say anything, "You need help?" And for once, there wasn't any edge in his voice. Just a question. I handed him a tray. "Take this to table 3 there," asking for more sliders. Just like that, without any big talk or ceremony, we worked side by side for the next hour, passing plates, refilling napkins, dodging spilled lemonade. He didn't complain. He didn't try to take over. He just helped. Later, while we were packing up, one of the teenagers asked if we were business partners. I started to laugh, but Derek said, "Not yet," and gave me a look-off challenge, half apology. I didn't answer. I didn't have to. Something had shifted between us, small but real, and I didn't want to jinx it with too many words. That night I went home exhausted but somehow light. My feet ached, but my heart felt full. I had a list of bookings for the next month, a crew of kids who might stick around, and maybe, just maybe, a son who was finally starting to understand what I'd been building, not just for me, but for all of us. For the first time in a long time, I didn't feel like I was fighting alone. The Monday after the luncheon, I was back in the kitchen before sunrise, watching the coffee drip like it was the only thing keeping me upright. I was still feeling the strange high of seeing Derek carry that tray without acting like it was beneath him. I wasn't sure how to feel about it, but I was cautiously hopeful, like maybe something had cracked open that could actually grow into something good. I had a busy week ahead, 2 small events, a pop-up at the church fair, and a request for a rustic tea party from a woman who sounded like she'd watched too many Hallmark movies. But instead of panic, I felt this quiet momentum, like the gears were finally turning in sync. Derek showed up mid-morning carrying a box of supplies from the bulk store. He looked like he hadn't decided if this was a real job or just a temporary truce, but he started unloading everything without being asked. He lined up the containers, double-checked the inventory, like someone who'd done this before, and I let him. I didn't say much. I just offered him a cup of coffee. He took it with a half-smile that felt bigger than it looked. We worked together all day, mostly in silence, with a little bickering over the labeling system or who moved the spice rack. Again, it reminded me of the way James and I used to fight over assembling furniture. Frustrating, but weirdly intimate. Around noon, Mia came home from school and immediately started bossing us around like a miniature kitchen manager, telling Derek to wash his hands before touching the frosting. And he actually did it. No eye roll, no sigh. That alone felt like progress. That evening, We catered a small outdoor dinner for a book club, just 10 women sitting in lawn chairs talking about memoirs and menopause. As the sun set, Derek handled the plating while I poured drinks. We moved in rhythm, passing trays, nodding at each other, like we'd been doing it forever. One of the women stopped me and said, "Your son has a real eye for presentation. Those mini quiches look like something out of a magazine." I looked over at him, sleeves rolled up, frowning at a tray like it had personally offended him. I nodded. "Yeah," I said. "He's better than he thinks." Later, when we were packing up, Derek pulled out his phone and snapped a picture of the food display. Then he took another of me wiping down a table while Mia made bunny ears behind my head. I didn't think much of it until I got home and saw he'd posted it on Instagram. "Mom's pantry is saving my life, one meatball at a time." I read it over and over. My heart caught somewhere between pride and disbelief. Then I looked at the comments, dozens of likes, messages from his friends, some surprised, some supportive, all genuine. That post did something. Over the next few days, I started getting messages from strangers, people asking if we were hiring, if we catered weddings, if we shipped baked goods. I couldn't answer fast enough. Derek started coming in earlier, staying later. He brought new ideas, helped tweak the menus, even redesigned the logo. He and Luke worked together to set up a basic website that looked more professional than anything I'd ever imagined. One night, after we finished testing recipes for a holiday event, he finally told me the truth, that a friend of his was the one who tanked the corporate gala deal, that he hadn't known until it was too late, that he'd felt guilty ever since. I didn't yell, I didn't cry. I just nodded and kept stirring the cranberry glaze, because sometimes forgiveness doesn't come in speeches, it just comes in not walking away. The truth was, I'd already forgiven him, not because he deserved it right away, but because holding on to all that anger felt like carrying a hot pan without oven mitts. Eventually, it just burns you. By Friday, we were getting ready for our biggest event yet, a school fundraiser for over 100 people, and we handled it like pros, running trays, answering questions, fixing things when the lemonade dispenser exploded all over the raffle table. When it was over, we stood in the parking lot, eating leftover brownies off a paper plate, too tired to talk, too wired to leave. Derek looked over at me and said, "You know, this is the first time." I felt like I wasn't screwing something up. He said it so quietly, I almost didn't hear him. For a moment, I didn't say anything at all. Then, I handed him another brownie and said, "You're not," and I meant it. Because this wasn't just a business anymore, it was a lifeline. For him, for me, for all of us. For the first time since James died, I didn't feel like I was just trying to fill an empty space. I felt like I was building something new. The week after the school fundraiser was a blur, like riding a bike downhill without brakes, fast, messy, but thrilling in a way that made my hands shake with excitement instead of fear. Every morning, I woke up to a phone full of notifications, emails asking if we were available, messages from local groups, even an inquiry from a wedding planner who wanted to collaborate. I laughed out loud when I read that because the only thing I'd ever collaborated on was Christmas dinner. And even that usually ended in arguments about the mashed potatoes. Derek started showing up before I'd even made coffee. Laptop open, planner out, wearing that old high school hoodie he refused to part with, but now it was paired with a Bluetooth headset and a to-do list. He worked like someone who finally believed he belonged here, like someone who had stopped waiting for permission to be useful. Mia appointed herself the decor boss. She drew up menu boards with glitter markers and asked every client their favorite color, like it was a legal requirement. And Luke, bless him, figured out how to fold napkins into little flowers and insisted on teaching the seniors at our next luncheon. Things weren't perfect. There were burnt cookies, last-minute cancellations, even a near disaster with a batch of seafood salad left too close to a heat lamp. But we rolled with it, we laughed through it, we fixed it, and we didn't fall apart. It wasn't just the business that was growing, it was us. One evening, after a long day prepping for a charity brunch, we all sat out on the back porch eating leftover sliders. Derek looked over, quiet in that way he gets when he's about to say something that matters. "I owe you an apology," he said, "for everything, for not believing in you, for what I said after Dad's funeral." I didn't say anything right away. Just sipped my tea and looked at him, really looked at him, the same man who once called me a burden, now showing up every day ready to build something with me. "That was a hell of a thing to say," I finally replied. He nodded, like he knew I wasn't going to sugarcoat it, but I added, I'm glad you're here. I'm proud of what we're doing. He smiled, then a small, honest smile that meant more than any big speech ever could. The next day, while reorganizing some files, I got a call from our lawyer. It confused me because I hadn't spoken to him in weeks. His voice was calm but serious as he explained that something new had come up. Apparently, James had left behind another asset, a small workshop property right next to our current space, fully paid off, in my name. I sat down in the middle of the call, my heart pounding so hard I could barely hear the rest of what he said. When I hung up, I just stared out the window at the alley between our building and the new place, realizing James had done one last thing to help me even from beyond. When I told Derek, he didn't say much at first. He just looked at that empty building like he could already see blueprints forming in his head. You know, he said finally, eventually we could turn it into a teaching kitchen, offer classes, bring in guest cooks, make it a real community hub. I laughed, partly because the idea was brilliant and partly because it was his, not mine. And I loved that we'd gotten to a place where it didn't matter whose idea it was, only that we were moving forward together. That weekend, after our last event of the month, the Grandparents' Day picnic with 3 kinds of lemonade and too many folding chairs, we all walked over to the new property. I had a ring of old keys and a box of donuts. We stepped inside for the first time. It was dusty, full of cobwebs and broken shelves. But the bones were solid, and the air felt different, like it was waiting for us to decide what it could be. Mia ran around measuring things with her arms, declaring exactly where the sprinkle station would go. Luke pointed out the perfect spot for a cookie decorating counter, and Derek just stood in the middle, hands on his hips, smiling like a man who saw a future where there used to be just walls. And I stood there, too, breathing it all in, feeling something I hadn't in a long time. Hope. I hadn't felt it in a long time. Not grief, not just survival, not even pride. Exactly. Something deeper. Legacy. James had built a life for us, and now we were building the next chapter. We spent the next few weeks turning James's old workshop into something that looked nothing like a workshop and everything like a new beginning. We hauled out rusted tools, knocked down the warped shelving he never got around to fixing, scrubbed years of dust off the windows until, finally, sunlight came through. As we worked, the space started to breathe again, like it was exhaling all that silence and waiting for something real to happen. Derek took charge of the structural stuff, calling his contractor buddy to fix the wiring, building a counter from reclaimed wood, measuring every wall like he was prepping for a Food Network special. I focused on what made a place feel warm, choosing colors that didn't scream institutional, laying out laminated recipe cards, hanging up photos from our earliest events, Mia's cookies, Luke's lemonade stand, a blurry shot of the first meal we ever served back when none of us knew what we were doing but did it anyway. Word spread slowly but steadily. People started asking about classes, widows who'd never cooked for one, young couples trying to eat better, teenagers who wanted to learn something that didn't involve staring at a screen. Before we even opened the doors officially, we already had a wait list. We decided to call it Parker's Pantry Collective, because it wasn't just mine anymore. It wasn't just a business. It was a shared place, a stitched-together second home for anyone who needed a warm plate, a good laugh, or a reminder that they still mattered. On opening day, I stood out front with Derek, Mia, and Luke, all of us wearing aprons with our names hand-stitched by one of the seniors from the luncheon program. We cut the ribbon with a pair of dull office scissors because we forgot to buy real ones, but nobody cared. People clapped. Someone brought flowers. The air smelled like cinnamon rolls and fried zucchini, which somehow worked together in a perfect way. Inside, the kitchen buzzed with life. Derek ran the first demo, showing everyone how to prep a week's worth of meals on a budget. Mia floated from station to station, reminding people to use the glitter responsibly. Luke managed the sign-in sheet like a tiny executive with a clipboard and serious eyebrows. I stood back for a moment, just watching it all, letting the noise and the motion wash over me. And I felt something settle in my chest that I hadn't realized was missing. Maybe peace, maybe satisfaction, or that quiet pride that comes when you realize you didn't just survive something hard, you built something beautiful because of it. James would have loved this, I thought. He would have teased me about my obsessive labeling system, made jokes about hippie food culture, but he would have helped, fixed the leaky faucet, handed out cookies when nobody was looking. And in a strange way, it felt like he was still part of all of it. At the end of the day, after the last guest left and we'd swept up all the sprinkles and folding chairs, Derek handed me a cup of tea. "You did it, Ma," he said quietly. "You really did it." I looked around at the space we'd created, at the people it brought together, at the way it hummed with life. And I corrected him gently but firmly. "No," I said, "we did, because for all the hurt, all the fights, all the years we'd wasted not hearing each other, we'd found our way back, through cinnamon and spreadsheets, through burnt muffins and forgiveness." Standing there in the glow of fresh paint and overhead lights, I knew this wasn't the end of a chapter. It was the beginning of something lasting, not just a business, not just a legacy, a life. A full, imperfect, beautiful life I built after being told I was a burden. And now I was the boss, the builder, the matriarch of Parker's Pantry, and I wasn't going anywhere. That's today's story. If it touched you, leave a like and subscribe. And don't forget, share your own life lesson in the comments below.